Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back for another great conversation with a thought leader, people who are out there fighting for us every day. Today, we're joined by an old friend, Amy Spitalnick, who's with the Jewish Council, I want to get it right, for Public Affairs, a more than 80-year-old organization. I didn't realize how long this had been around, but welcome, Amy. Thanks for being here with us today.
So much for having me.
So give us a little background before we get into the meat of the matter and sort of why you're in the news right now and why you've taken some steps that have brought attention to your organization, your work. Talk a little bit about the organization itself and where do you fit in the constellation of Jewish organizations in America?
Jewish Council for Public Affairs, JCPA, we've been around since 1944, which, as you probably know, is a time where Jews in America were really working desperately to try to save European Jewry, quite literally trying to bang down the door of the White House and not getting anywhere. And there was a recognition that Jewish safety would only be achieved here and globally by building broad, strong coalitions across communities rooted in our shared safety and our shared rights. And that was the genesis for what's now known as JCPA, which I was proud to join as CEO in 2023, a month before October 7th, certainly in terms of taking on the easy roles. And our work is really rooted in this framework, this deep recognition that Jewish safety is inextricably linked with inclusive democracy, that anti-Semitism is used to undermine democracy, and so too, Jews have historically been safest in inclusive, pluralistic democracies. And our work is focused on doing both, protecting democracy at this existential moment and working in coalition spaces to make sure that people understand Jewish safety is critical to protecting our democracy.
And last week, you helped organize a statement that spoke to the moment we're in. If you can talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So since, months ago at this point, when the first arrests started, we at JCPA have been making clear that two things are true at the same time. That, of course, anti-Semitism is real. We've seen it increase over the last decade, and we've particularly seen it increase since October 7th, and that includes anti-Semitism on campus. And at the same time, that we are not comfortable with our very legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism being exploited to undermine the democratic norms and rights and academic institutions that have been so inherent to our safety as Jews and the safety and rights of all communities for generations. And so last week, we were really proud to partner with our friends from the Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist movements, with the National Council of Jewish Women, with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to pull together a statement of legacy mainstream Jewish organizations representing a significant swath of American Jewry to make clear that we're rejecting this false choice between countering anti-Semitism and protecting democracy, that in fact we can do both at the same time. We can make crystal clear there is very real and rising anti-Semitism and counter it directly on college campuses and beyond. And in doing so, not give up on the core democratic norms and rights that have been so inherent to our safety and our values as Jews.
Well, it comes at an incredibly important moment when we also saw last week the president of Harvard issue, this beautiful and powerful and inspiring letter. And I do think we're seeing now the power of these kinds of statements, right? In a time when we're all trying to navigate the complexity of what's happening here, the fear that we all have, right? The sense of loss that we all have, that these kind of clear calls, these clarion calls, where statements, where values are put forward in such powerful ways are really needed right now. And so what's been the reaction since last week when you put out the statement? And if you can talk a little bit more about the guts. I almost read it. I almost was going to read it today because I think it's actually very beautifully written, like the Harvard statement, clear, concise, muscular, strong, defending powerful time-worn values, right? And so just thank you for this. I think it was
Thank you.
desperately needed. But how's the reaction been since you released it last week?
The reaction has largely been incredibly positive, and we've been heartened by what we've heard from Jewish leaders, rabbis, and other clergy and other folks around the country. And I will say it tracks with what we at JCPA have been experiencing over the last few months. Part of my job is traveling the country, meeting with Jewish communities, speaking in synagogues and at universities, and a variety of other spaces. And in the last month alone, I've been, for example, at University of Michigan and Columbia, two places that have been well in the news on these issues. I've spoken to synagogues and communities, some that tend to lean left, some that might be more considered center right. And while perhaps institutionally it has felt a little lonely to carve out this position to say two things are true at the same time, that Jewish safety is under threat and that we are not going to stand for it being exploited to undermine our democracy. In terms of the average American Jew that we've spoken with, it feels like there is broad consensus that we can actually hold this complexity and this nuance. And that's because, really, to your point, our democratic norms, these academic institutions have been so inherent to our own story as Jews. My grandparents came here after surviving the Holocaust. The rest of their families didn't. They were a seamstress and a taxi driver, and it was the American academic institutions that really allowed my family to advance in this. My parents went on to become New York City public school teachers. I went to Tufts like you,
Yeah.
and ultimately ended up doing the work that I'm doing because of these institutions and values that have been so inherent to our community and to our country. And so I think there's a very visceral feeling that what we're seeing elicits. We know, again, that we can speak up against this without giving an inch on the importance of fighting anti-Semitism at a moment when, as we saw with, for example, Governor Josh Shapiro last week, we know it's also at really significant horrific levels. And these things are not at odds with one another. Jewish safety and inclusive democracy are not at odds with one another. In fact, they're actually one and the same.
Yeah, I think that we've spent time in the Hopium community. We had Dr. Michael Mann on recently, who's one of the most outspoken scientists in the country, talking about the significance, not just on the attack on free speech and First Amendment rights, but on the defunding of research institutions and the unraveling of our public health system in America, and the attack on our scientific community, which, these are the things that have been not just the engines of our freedom, but the engines of our prosperity, for a long time, and our global dominance in so many fields. And the fact that anti-Semitism is being used as the sort of the rubric or the excuse for what is really a savage attack, a broader attack on independent thinking and science and technology and medicine and public health, it is in its own way an affront, and I can say this, and an affront to Jews, right? In the sense that in the name of Jews, these things that are being done are so damaging to the country and to the prospects, of our kids. I mean, I talk about, and Hopium has got its own ideological orientation, is that I talk about one of the things that's really motivating me is that I feel that these efforts are stealing the future of my three Gen Z kids. And because they're, one of my son's jobs that he was preparing for through his academic training is now basically gone. My daughter wants to be a doctor. She's 19. The opportunities for that are going to be significantly curtailed by the unraveling of our public health system. And it's all with the cover of anti-Semitism, right? And punishing universities. We're going to prevent cancer research from happening, or research on TB, or research on other diseases because of anti-Semitism. I mean, it's the opposite of what should be happening, right? If you want to celebrate and protect Jews, you should be protecting knowledge, science, technology, advancement, right? It's the opposite of what's being argued.
Absolutely. Look, and none of this is actually going to end well for the Jews, I would say, on a variety of fronts. First and foremost, we're now being blamed by extremists on both ends of the political spectrum for what the administration is doing. It's actually fomenting anti-Semitism at a time when it was already at record levels. And so if the administration were serious about countering anti-Semitism, there are so many things that they could do. They could invest in the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, which is the office responsible for protecting Jewish and all college students on campuses around the country, K through 12 and on the university setting. Instead, they've gutted that office. They've slashed its budget by horrific levels. And so the very tools that we have to protect Jewish students on campus have been totally gutted by this administration. If they were serious about countering anti-Semitism, they wouldn't be appointing folks like the new Department of Defense Deputy Press Secretary or Elon Musk to positions where, with their long history of espousing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, they now have new platforms. They wouldn't be pardoning January 6th insurrectionists who engaged in anti-Semitism. They would be investing in the core efforts to counter hate and extremism that have been so inherent to Jewish safety and that experts across the board recognize are critical to the fight against anti-Semitism. But instead, they're exploiting our community's legitimate fears in service of this broader anti-democratic agenda. And again, it's not going to end well for the Jews, both because we know these academic institutions, the research, the cancer research, the Alzheimer's research, all of the things that are now on the chopping block are so inherent to, again, our own advancement in this country and the safety of so many in this country. And also the idea that any of this is going to start and stop with a couple of pro-Palestinian activists on a couple of campuses, which in and of itself should be enough to make us speak up. But it very clearly is not going to stop there. We've already seen hundreds of visa revocations, these higher profile cases like the Tufts student or others where we know there are massive concerns around due process and other basic rights. And so the idea that this isn't a slippery slope, that it's not going to ultimately come for all of us, is ignoring a long history that we as Jews know all too well.
Well, and among the other things the administration could do is the president could have called Governor Shapiro and talked to him about what happened and the threat to his life just recently. Or one thing that I know that is important that you've worked on is the DHS office that also, can you talk a little bit about that? Because DHS is in the process, I believe, right, of also defunding an office that was responsible for actually helping fortify and secure synagogues and other places of Jewish gathering all across the country, right?
Yeah, well, look, there's a variety of different programs that are on the chopping block now that have been inherent to direct nonprofit security grants, including the nonprofit security grant program you just mentioned. This is the program that actually helps ensure synagogues, Jewish institutions, and a variety of other institutions that have been directly targeted by violent extremism in recent years have the resources they need to protect themselves. This should be a no-brainer, but if you're serious about countering anti-Semitism or any other form of hate, this program wouldn't be on the chopping block. So too have we seen this administration completely gut the programs at DHS and the FBI that are inherent to broader identification and countering of violent extremism, including specific programs at the FBI focused on countering, for example, violent white supremacist extremism. We know that the deadliest attack on the US Jewish community happened not very long ago in 2018 in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life. In a cycle of anti-Semitic attacks that also included the Charlottesville violence, which I spent a large part of my career focused on in leading the organization that brought a lawsuit against the extremists responsible, the Poway attack at a Chabad in California, the El Paso attack, which targeted the Latino community in Texas, the Buffalo attack that targeted the Black community, all motivated by this very same anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic extremism that has been a direct threat to Jews and so many others. And so when you're gutting the programs intended to protect against those rising threats, Jewish safety is on the chopping block as well. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be focused on the very real anti-Semitism that we've seen spike after October 7th, including on college campuses. But being serious about countering anti-Semitism and all forms of hate requires the federal government and every other level of government to be clear-eyed about the threats, no matter where they exist, rather than turning them into political wedges to advance an agenda.
Amy, where can people find the statement that you released last week?
So folks can go to jewishpublicaffairs.org. The statement is front and center on our website. You can read it in full, and we encourage folks to do so, to share it. We think it's so important to make clear that the significant swath of mainstream American Jewry are speaking out and recognizing again that we can hold multiple truths, that we can be deeply concerned about anti-Semitism, and that we should not allow it as an excuse to undermine our democracy.
And if people want to get more involved in your organization or book you for a speaking event, for example, how do they find you on that same website?
Same website, jewishpublicaffairs.org. There's a variety of ways to get involved. We are frequently on the road working with communities around the country, and we have great local partners in a variety of cities through the Jewish Community Relations Councils and others. So reach out to us at jewishpublicaffairs.org to get involved with our work, to share the statement, or to otherwise let us know how we can help you.
Listen, thank you so much for your incredible work now, not just for this, but your whole career where you've been fighting so hard. We are Tufts Jumbos together. We've crossed paths through the broader Tufts network over the years, but I'm just really grateful for your grounded and powerful work, the clarity of your voice in this critical time for the country. I hope to have you back because, I mean, obviously, this debate is, we're going to be having it for some time, unfortunately, right? We're in
Not going
this,
away.
we're not going away. We're in this, we're going to be in this place, this in between place, where in between where we were and hopefully to a better place coming forward for some time. And so we'd love to have you back, Amy. And we'll definitely promote all of your on our site at Hopium. I'll have links to the statement and to the site, and to so you can learn more about Amy. And Amy, thank you for your incredible work. And fingers crossed. I mean, this is I think what we're learning in this time of challenge and crisis, and even though these are all things that we studied as students, when things like this come to countries like the United States, every step forward, right, matters. And I think the bravery, the courage that you all showed, the organizational capacity to rally a large group of organizations behind you, courage is contagious, and cowardice is also the opposite, right? Which is that if people aren't pushing, it creates more space for people to live in cowardice and not courage. And so every step forward matters. I think we have seen lots of important steps forward in recent weeks across many fronts, but certainly we have a lot of work to do. And I'm glad to be in the trenches with you.
Feeling is very mutual. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Amy.